Hey there y'all, this is going to be a blazing fast video of some different concepts of C#. I'm also going to include some additional resources down in the description to help you learn these concepts, as they are pretty crucial for developing software in C# and many other programming languages. Now, with our starter code here, there's a few lines that are called statements. Different statements do different things in the computer and allow us to create interesting structures, logic, and behavior. The using system is the first statement. The semicolon marks the end of a statement. This tells the computer that we are using a chunk of code that is outside of the code that we are writing. Using libraries of code from the standard C# library or from Godot, we'll need a using statement to get the external reference imported into our local code. The namespace hello world statement tells the computer what chunk of code this will belong to. The hello world is the name of the namespace and can be anything we like. Generally, you want to make the names logical for what they contain. And when we get talking about modules, you generally want them to relate to the module name that the code is contained under. Next, we have a curly bracket. These open and close to form what are called blocks. A block can stand on its own, but they are usually after some kind of statement like the namespace hello world or class program. Notice how the statements here don't end with a semicolon. These statements have a block, which shows that there is more code inside of it. The nesting of blocks usually follows a standard pattern, which is namespace, then class, then the methods, then control statements. So following this pattern, we can guess that the static void main line is a method. Methods are generally a small chunk of code that actually does something. Each class can have many methods in its block, and the methods themselves can have many lines of code in their blocks as well. You can see that the statement console.writeLine doesn't have a block on its own. It ends with a semicolon. Only certain restricted words can have a block. These are the namespace, class, static void, and many others. If you followed the Godot tutorial episode 1 already, you may have noticed that there was just a void and not the static. The static word actually isn't required for methods. It determines how other classes are allowed to access this method. But for this, we need to get into how object-oriented programming works. In object-oriented programming, or OOP, we use class to define a template for something called an object. The class is always one thing, but the object is an instance of the class and can be modified with different data values. Different objects can interact with each other by calling methods on them. Generally, in OOP, we want each class to manage data internally and use methods to allow external objects to request some kind of change or behavior. That way, other objects don't really need to know what is happening for the data to be managed. They just need to know what their desired effect is. An example would be a light switch. You flick the light switch to turn the light on and off. You don't really need to think about what kind of voltage is needed for the light to work, or what kinds of safety features need to be managed in the light to make sure it doesn't explode. You don't have to worry about it because the light fixture is managing all of this for you. That means that lighting up a room is as easy as accessing something provided to you by the light fixture. This is the core principle to OOP. So knowing this, we know that we will be making classes that contain data and methods, and the methods will be used by external classes to modify or request behavior from the class. Now, if we look at our statement in the main method, we can see a pattern of console.writeLine, which is two names separated by a period. The console is another class defined by the C# standard library. It exists in the system namespace, which is why we need the using system statement at the top. The period tells the computer we want to access something in the console code block. Then we give the name of what we want to access. In this case, it is a method named writeLine, which is a method that takes some text and writes it as a line to the console. So the quotation marks show that the text we are writing isn't code, but it's literal text called a string in code because it is a string of characters. The parentheses around the text specify that we are sending that data over to the method to let it do something with it. This should be enough to get you started following along for the basic tutorials. There is a lot more than this to programming and C# specifically. I always recommend looking up things if they don't make sense. Again, I have some resources in the description to help you along. I specifically didn't cover the topic of variables and control statements in this tutorial. I might make a video in the future for these concepts, but for now I hope this is enough to follow along. This is my first video actually having some subscribers, so I'd like to give a big thank you to Miguel and Noel, my two first bronze supporters. Thank you so much.